Hello, everybody, WDJY listeners, Facebook, YouTube, Patreon, our new Patreon page. Hello, everybody. Well, I get excited about our shows, of course, all our shows, but I have to say I'm a little bit extra excited today because I have the one and only Pat Shannon in studio live, which usually doesn't happen, but it turns out he lives in a town where I live, which I'm not going to tell you. So I could give you a cell phone and address out if you want. Yeah. Just kidding.
It could be dangerous living so close to me.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, make sure I have enough space there just in case something goes off, right? Wow, guys, you are going to be in for a treat today. We have an incredible show. We're going to be getting down to so many different conspiracies that have been floating around and getting some real deep details and probably getting the final truth, in my opinion. But that's just me being prejudiced. From JFK to the Oklahoma bombing to 9/11, we probably ought to go back to Pearl Harbor and even further back to remember the name Maine if we really want to, right?
Yep.
It's just everything where we ever had, for the most part, in our recent history or even past history has been a big setup. Anyway, I digress. So we're going to have a great show. You're going to want to check this out. Stay tuned. Start clicking on your Facebook. Start sharing your Facebook. Facebook always changes their algorithm, so you never know what's going to be done on posting or ads. So sharing is your best way to get the message out if you're inclined to. A couple of things before we get into the details, and I do a formal introduction of Pat here. I want to mention a couple of things here. Ted Maier's show Friday. I'm going to be on Ted Maier's show Friday. He's out West Coast, right? Seattle, I think, area there. That's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to be talking about probably integrative medicine and the different things that need to be addressed. Dr. Amy Daries will be on the Manifesting Hour with Catherine Pike. That's tomorrow at 1 p.m. She started her own show. Her debut show, I think, was last week, Jesse, right, on Tuesday?
2 weeks ago. Her second show's this week.
Her second show's this week, okay. Yeah. So she did a fantastic job, and her show is called Whole Healing, and she's an integrative dentist, which is pretty nice to have, right?
Very nice. Did you know that the teeth are the control center of the organs?
I just learned that about a year ago. I wish I knew that before I took my wisdom teeth out. There's a reason why they call them wisdom teeth, and we just kind of ignore it. They just take it out, right? It's like, hello, it's in the word.
Yeah.
Why would you do that? Let's think here.
All my wisdom teeth fit comfortably in my mouth.
Real? Oh, good for you.
They just grew in there. I'm like, nice.
Well, you are very wise.
Yes.
Well, it explains a lot about me, I guess. So also, cancer survivor and poet Richard Harvey, Creative Warrior Ventures, will be on Tuesday at 11 a.m. for the Good Intention Show. I'll be talking to him. He uses poetry and creative writing to cope with cancer and has a large community that's following his lead. Can you imagine that, huh? You know what, to me, that's like the power of intention.
That is the power of intention.
Exactly. Creativity and it's just, of course, mixed in with good non-fluoride water. Maybe non-GMO, no glyphosate in your meal, although it's hard to get out of it now since it's airborne. And eliminate the aluminums flying from the skies. It'd be nice, too, as well. But on top of that, your intentions really, I think, is critical, more so than anything. Because, you hear these stories about the gurus who eat poison, and they're able to, through epigenetics and the power of the mind and the intention and the spirit, let's say, able to transform that type of experience. So there's something there. Anyway, I think it's very important to do. So that's coming up, and so enjoy that. That's Tuesday next week at 11 a.m. So let's get to the show today, because I'd be talking about a few more things, but I'm too excited, Pat. I have to really bring you in here. Pat Shannon, of course, has two first names, just like me, Tim Ray, so I think we bonded on that right from the get-go. But let me tell you about Pat a little bit. He's an investigative journalist. He's author and radio show host. Pat Shannon has been in pursuit of his truth for nearly half a century. Good friends with Jim Marr, or what? God bless Jim Marr. Wherever he is right now. I'm sure he's probably figuring out what's going on up in heaven right now. Probably doing some investigative journalism, huh?
Making fun of us.
Yeah, making fun. He's probably here right now. Intrigued by deception and ongoing cover-up of the JFK assassination, he began to notice a similar pattern in 1968 murders of Martin Luther King. Let's talk about Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy too, okay? All right. And also then he found an altered and intentional fabricated FBI official reports regarding these and other cases and began to notice cooperative news media. Ooh, the old AP, Reuters, right to the Rothschilds, I'm sure, ignoring blatant pertinent facts as well. Once you get control of the media, you really could just do whatever you want until people wake up. And that's probably what's been going on for a long time here. Pat is also author of 9 books. I mean, 9. I happened to have the blessing to see his bookshelves, and I'm gonna tell you something. It was just mind-boggling. If I was kind of had my mind at the time, I would have taken a picture just to look at it. My God, is so many. One thing was just dedicated JFK books, I think, right? It was incredible. I mean, just great information. He's really been researching this for a long, long time. And he's also author of 9 books, and his 2011 history book here, Everything They Ever Told Me Was a Lie, which I think is right here. Let's hold that up there for a second. This is a great book. You guys got to check this out. This is a hot book. This is hot information right off the press in the sense of what you need to learn about what pretty much everything that we deal with in our day-to-day life is a lie, from the media to the pharma to the what's occurred in these different events. 9/11, yeah, I tell you, 9/11's a lie. Yeah, sure is. A whole bunch of other things. So it's a great book to pick up. Also, Unknown Facts of Many Deceptions Perpetrated by the Federal Government. Really? Federal government does not have our best interest? That's a first I've heard of that. Perpetuated by what calls the CMM, the Control Mass Media. His latest miracle in Atlanta is a story defeating the U.S. attorney in a full-blown 10-day criminal trial in Atlanta federal court by using a fool for a client toward a happy ending. What is that? That's we'll have to talk about that. You can reach him at inaworldreport.com. I'm sorry, INIworldreport.com. And INI is for international?
Independent News International.
Independent News International, INIworldreport.com. Without further ado, Pat Shannon, welcome.
Hi. Okay, Tim. Thank you.
Oh, God, what an exciting day. We're going to be talking about so much information. And before we go into some of those details, let's talk a little bit about you for a second, if you don't mind.
All right.
All right. Tell me first your relationship with Jim Marr.
Well, Jim and I, of course, were drawn together by the JFK research. He, I think, is about the only one that's been on it as long as I have, but he was on it professionally before I was, because he finished college I think he was about a senior in '63 when it was happening, and he went immediately to work with the Fort Worth newspapers, and so he became very, very interested in the Kennedy assassination because it is in his backyard. I was interested from the beginning, but in '63, we couldn't learn very much. We had only one source, and it was corrupted, the U.S. news media. So we had to accept the Oswald theory, even though it smelled.
Yeah.
And by April of '64, I picked up a book, the first book, as I remember, that it came out in paperback, a 75-cent paperback called Who Killed Kennedy? And it was intriguing. He didn't have a lot of answers, but I've still got my copy from 50-odd years ago.
You really?
And,
That's great.
but he didn't have a lot of answers, but he had so many great questions. And then come September of '64, with the Warren omission, I was hooked for life.
Notice that the Warren omission, not commission.
I was hooked for life then, but I really got on the whole inside, I think, of the core of the problem with the CIA and the whole bit in '66 when a man by the name of Richard Popkin in San Diego, he was an investigator. He wasn't even a writer. He was a professor of philosophy, as I remember, at San Diego State. But like an average American citizen, he also was intrigued as I was. And he wrote a book called The Second Oswald. And this really got me because he had so many great examples. First of all, Lee Oswald introduces himself as a car dealer, and he's driving up and down Stemmons Freeway in Dallas at 80 miles an hour and saying, "My name's Lee Harvey Oswald. I'm going to be coming into some money soon, and I'm going to come back and buy this car from you," just drawing attention to himself. And this was in the summer of 1961. Well, Popkin points out, Oswald went to Russia in '59. He didn't return until '62. Who is this guy in '61 in Dallas? That got my attention. But even the clincher was, how can a high school dropout, 17 years old, Lee Harvey Oswald, join the Marines at 17, allegedly, not provably, in fact, doubtfully now, but allegedly went to language school for 6 weeks in Japan, and he comes out speaking Russian so fluently that when he meets his future bride, Marina, a few years later, she thinks he's a native. He speaks the language so fluently.
Well, that's what I find fascinating so much about this book here is the JFK and the uncensored story of the two Oswalds is exactly that. There's Lee, and then there's Harvey. So and we're not talking about multiple personalities, are we? What are we? What are we talking about
No,
here?
we're talking about two different people, and even with two different mothers, and we have both mothers' pictures in there.
Yeah, I think I find that.
Marguerite, the real Marguerite, and the one who posed as Marguerite. But the two were brought together as early as 1953, a good decade before the assassination. So they obviously were not brought together to kill Kennedy.
Yeah.
But they were brought together for something. Why? Well, probably because the one that we know as Harvey, the only Oswald we ever knew, the public ever knew, was probably a war orphan who grew up speaking fluent Russian. And when he was discovered, probably at the time when Lee's mother had taken him to New York, and they had here, I'll do that. I know what that is.
Yeah,
It's
sure.
near the back. Right. But probably about the time that they had gone to New York, the second Oswald kid was discovered, and probably the conversation went like this: "Hey, what can we do with a 13-year-old kid that speaks fluent Russian? Surely we can use him somewhere in the Cold War."
Right.
And
he has no family. I mean, he's easily manipulated and promised whatever they wanted to promise him, right?
Right. And then they discovered that he looked quite a bit like this other kid there in town. And come to find out that other kid in town named Lee had a brother named Robert who happened to be in military intelligence in the service already. And he was his name was Robert Oswald. And Robert Oswald, this is what Jim Mars and I put together.
Right.
Probably looked at the picture and said, "Yeah, you're right. He does look like me, but he looks a whole lot more like my little brother." And this seems to be a feasible reason why they would have been brought together in New Orleans, New Orleans of all places.
Right. But it all seems so coincidental. It's like how much is it just like coincidence? Like, wow, this guy looks like his brother. Oh, wow, this guy. Or how much was it actually orchestrated? Was it the CIA or the government agencies who were involved? Were they actually seeking this out, or just kind of like happenstance that pops up and happenstance they pop up and they see that? I mean, by the way, let me show you real quick here. The two pictures of Lee, supposedly Lee Harvey Oswald's mothers. One looks good looking, the other one looks a little scary. So maybe it's a bad hair day or something, but I don't know. If you look closely enough, you can see they're two separate people. And
I like the happy one.
yeah.
Well, and Lee's mother was quite a bit younger too than
Right.
Harvey's. Now, Harvey's mother Marguerite was the only one we ever knew. Jim Mars interviewed her, by the way.
Oh, really?
But this book of mine, once again, I rode this whole thing for 30 years, and Mars and another guy named Robert Groden, who was quite active in the assassination research, they both covered this Oswald thing, this potential evidence of being two Oswalds. For back in I guess they finally got out in the 80s, and Jim's book came out, of course, in 90, and he mentions it's there, but none of us had the proof until a man by the name of John Armstrong came along. And as I say in the beginning of my book, and as I say on the radio a lot, John Armstrong was the reason for this. But my book was not inspired. My book was provoked because of the wonderful research, 1,000-page. I showed you the book the other day. His 1,000-page epic that he wrote called Harvey and Lee, and he gives us, such as those pictures we just showed of the mama, but he gives us irrefutable evidence of the two Oswalds. That not only the kid speaking New Orleans English, one of the most distinguishable accents in the world, going to language school for 6 weeks and suddenly becomes fluent. It just didn't mesh.
Well, for our new listeners to the JFK conspiracy, I mean, why was it so important to have two Oswalds?
Well, I'm sure that the conspiracy to use them against Kennedy probably didn't get in motion until May or April or May of '63.
So 2 years later.
No, 10 years later after they brought them together.
Oh, 10 years. Oh, wow.
Yeah, see, they were brought together as kids.
Oh.
Now, we have an example in here of a high school senior in New Orleans in '57 who distinctly remembered Harvey because they were best friends, and he could put a date on it because October the 5th of 1957 was the day the Russians shot up Sputnik.
So you think, these agencies, they're just looking for potential talent in the future to use them for whatever potential a psyop at the time when needed. So they groom people. They don't know really what it's for. They just
All the
groom 'em.
time.
They do it all the
All
time.
the time.
That's a typical CIA operation.
Yes, they don't. They certainly didn't know what they were going to use them for in '53. They weren't even grown up yet. But by the time '63 came along, they were groomed. And of course, some of the previous things that had been done on Assassination Day, for instance,
Which was what? What was that day?
November 22nd, 1963.
Where were you?
I was driving from New Orleans to Jackson, Mississippi. I was a nightclub entertainer at the time, and I had a folk singing trio, and I had a day off and a weekend off.
From where were you?
New Orleans?
New Orleans to Jackson, Mississippi.
Yeah, that's a
I was in
couple hundred miles.
I was in Jackson, Mississippi when 9/11 happened. That's funny. Just
I see.
See, there's a conspiracy there already. Anyway, go
And
ahead.
Michael Monk is in New Orleans right now. The conspiracy continues.
Yeah, like you were saying. So you.
Well, I was driving to see some friends in Jackson, and we were doing a show at Delta State University the following Tuesday, which was the day after the Kennedy funeral. And you can imagine how many lines we had to change on our show.
Oh God,
for the college concert.
Oh yeah. Well, I asked that question because it's those moments in time. Everybody, at least if you grew up here, knows where they were at that moment. So it's almost like burned in their
Well,
memory.
funny you should mention that. Do you know who Kathy O'Brien is?
Absolutely, yeah.
Well,
David Icke's, multiple personality
MK
person.
Ultra
MK Ultra,
victim.
yeah, victim.
I interviewed Kathy and Mark Phillips, her husband, who he just passed away this past year. I don't know if you knew it.
No, I didn't know that.
But Kathy used the Kennedy assassination as an example of how they can zap into your brain. The MK Ultra people, they hit them with a stun gun where the prongs are over and under one of the eyes, and they hit them with a couple 100,000 volts of stun, and this puts them under trauma. And she used an example. She said, "You remember where you were when Kennedy got shot, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I sure do." And I could tell you in detail. Driving to New Orleans, walked in the apartment. My friend, whom I can name, was standing in front of the TV. He said, "Hey, somebody just shot Kennedy." And I can tell you who was there. Two other guys who were rooming together, all bachelors. And I said, "Yes, absolutely." She said, "You were traumatized, but it was a mild trauma compared to what they do to the MK Ultra victims." And she went on to explain how under her, even Reagan and Bush would send her to like Saudi Arabia. And she was a sex object, and she would spend the weekend with the King Saud over there, but she didn't have to have a recorder because it was all here.
Wow.
And she could come back and recite everything he said, just like turning on a recorder. Sure. And she even demonstrated for me. She could imitate Ronald Reagan's voice. Here's a female using it, and she could talk just like Reagan. You'd think you were talking to him on the phone.
Wow. Because there's all different purpose for different MK Ultra survivors. Like Lisa E., who we were doing a series with, she was a sex assassin. She would actually kill people, but she was probably more of a kind of a get information type of a MK Ultra.
They called them presidential models.
Gotcha. So, so you were saying right before we mentioned about where you were. So these Oswalds were raised up and brought up for a certain purpose later on, and they're utilized. CIA does this operation all the time. At any given time, they could be pulling people in, and it's an induction, isn't it? It's more of a mind control, like a lighter version, then to a more serious mind control.
Well,
process.
they're doing it right now. Look at the Sandy Hoax, as I call it.
Sandy Hoax.
The Boston Marathon. The Boston Globe advertised on their website the morning of the marathon bombing that there will be a drill and it will be beginning in front of the library. That's exactly where the bombs went off. It's every time there's a drill going on when these things happen. Of course, Las Vegas has just been blown apart. We even got FBI agents now that are coming forward to saying it was bogus.
Well, they killed a couple witnesses, I think, who said that they said that she said I was there. It was a lot more people going on, and what was going on, and she disappeared. So where does it come out? Just the control of the media is able to just manipulate this? Is the Mandela effect? Like, for example, in the car. I've seen so many videos. All I remember seeing really is Jackie O, Kennedy, and the driver. But that's not really the truth, is it?
No. In fact, for 10 years, Bill Cooper got the rumor circulating, and he sold me, as shown on the video.
Have you met Bill Cooper? And have you met him?
He's dead.
I know, but have you met him?
Only on radio. We never
Gotcha.
met eye to eye. But Cooper had the video showing how it was William Greer, the Secret Service driver, who slowed the car down, turned around, and fired and hit Kennedy, allegedly at the same time that the rifle guy was hitting him. That turned out to be not true at all. In fact, Bob Groden, the photographic expert and probably one of the leading guys on the Kennedy research, pointed out to me personally. He and I did become friends when I was living in Dallas about 10, 12 years ago. But he showed me how do you know the video I'm talking about where they want to say it was Greer pulling the trigger?
Yeah.
Well, actually, it's Kellerman, who was the Secret Service director. He was the head, whatever they call it, for that operation, was riding on the shotgun side, and he turns to his left as Greer is turning to his right, and the sun is actually shining off of Kellerman's semi-bald head, and it looks like a 45 in Greer's hand.
Wow.
And it was very convincing. I don't think Cooper was lying. I just think he was fooled.
Yeah. But who else was in the car that most people don't even realize?
Well, Governor Connolly and his wife, Nellie.
Yeah, so there's actually 4 people plus the driver in the actual car. But I was watching clips and
No, 5. There's 6 people in the car.
Who's the other one?
Greer and Kellerman are driving in the front.
Okay, gotcha, okay.
Then the Connollys, and then the Kennedys in the rear.
But I mean, I could show you some video right now that says there's only Jackie O and Kennedy in there. Plus, I mean.
Oh no.
I know, but it's all fake. I mean, it's
no, it's not fake. You're just seeing the rear picture. You're just seeing the close up of the back seat.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's the one where they wanted to show that Jackie had done it. And slipped it in. Yeah, that was ridiculous. I said to somebody who tried to sell me on, I said, "Oh, what about the other 8 or 9 bullets that are flying all over? Did Jackie do that too?"
Well, couldn't there have been multiple shooters and like
they absolutely were.
Couldn't there have been? She could have been an MK Ultra. I mean, who knows with these situations? But I'm just saying you have to verify different angles.
I'll tell you what, she had plenty of motivation to kill her husband, but she dang sure ain't going to do it in public like that.
There goes all the alimony, You can't risk that. But no, we jest about that. So the leading theory that you follow right now, there's 2 Oswalds, and so what do they actually do to set up? How'd they set up this murder?
Well, Lee Oswald was instrumental he was hanging around Dallas all summer of '63. Harvey went to New Orleans. I believe he was directed there. And he went there around 1st of May of '63 after he allegedly had taken a shot at the military general that they didn't like, the John Bircher. I can't think of his name offhand, but that was phony also. That was a setup. Now he's in New Orleans for the summer, and Robert Oswald and Lee are seen hanging around together, and Lee was friends with Jack Ruby. Harvey was not.
Okay.
Harvey returned in the end of September of '63, and they claimed he had gone, later they'd gone to Mexico City, but we got pictures in here of the guy that was spotted in Mexico City. Harvey never went to Mexico City.
Yeah.
He did get a job in early October, around the 10th, as I recall, at the school book depository. Obviously was assigned to do that.
Right.
And he worked on the 6th floor in warehousing books. They set up on the 6th floor, and most people have seen pictures of this, what they call a sniper's nest. The sniper's nest was way down at the east end of the building and of the 6th floor. And they later showed how shots would have come from the west end of the 6th floor. But the sniper's nest was set up down here to the left and by looking out. And it was a perfect position for Oswald, had he been in that sniper's nest, to shoot Kennedy when he was coming up the street right at him, like shooting at the clock there.
Yeah.
But instead, the motorcade turned and went this way, as you know. And by the time Kennedy was hit, Oswald would have had been shooting through a tree to hit him from here. So the whole scenario they tried to sell us was ridiculous. Also, the three shots, single bullet theory,
right.
Which was ridiculous, and everybody knew it. All the doctors at Parkland, more than a dozen doctors, said the shot entered here and exited in the rear.
Right.
There was doctoring that went on, of course, at the autopsy in D.C.
Hey, Jesse, open the door.
There was destruction of evidence by the FBI taking over the case and took all the evidence back to Washington along with the body. And there was a scuffle at Parkland when the medical examiner of Dallas County was there, and Secret Service is trying to escort the body out on a Gunny and the Gurney is what I'm trying to think of.
Yeah.
And he tries to stop them, and he said, "No, we're taking." No, you can't. That's against the law. This is a Texas jurisdiction of a murder in Texas. And they pulled their guns on him.
Really?
And, yeah, they scared him to death. And Dr. Crenshaw, who was a doctor there also, and also did the Oswald last rites, testified. They told me this personally. I interviewed Dr. Crenshaw back in about '91. And in fact, when Oswald was killed on Sunday, Crenshaw was the surgeon who was trying to save him. And he gets a call. Crenshaw gets a call. This is Sunday afternoon, 48 hours after JFK. And he gets a call from the White House. And he's in the middle of trying to save a man's life. And he's called on the phone and said, "Doctor, this is the President of the United States. It's Lyndon Johnson." He said, "We have," and Crenshaw had mentioned in his book that there was some strange-looking character standing there in an overcoat. And we want you to get a deathbed confession. And Oswald couldn't talk. And he said, "We have our man there too that you can give it to." And he was a CIA guy, was already standing inside the operating room.
Wow, making sure he didn't say anything, right?
Yeah, and if he did, then they would get it. But
Okay, so how many shooters were there, and who were they?
well, it's hard to say who they were because a couple have taken credit. One being Jim Files, with whom I have corresponded quite a bit. He's in Chicago, and he was in Stateville at the penitentiary at the time I was writing back and forth to him a few years ago. But he says he was a 21-year-old who was behind the fence and had been escorted down there by Charles Nicoletti, who was a mobster in Chicago, had driven him there. Others, you can read about it in the two Oswalds book, but one man from Oklahoma, he was particularly dark-skinned Indian, and he said that in 1961, when he was in Dallas at a funeral of Sam Rayburn, that he was approached by Lyndon Johnson's guy, who was Mac Wallace. Mac Wallace's fingerprints were later found in the sniper's nest at the East End. We think Mac Wallace, he was Johnson's assassin. He killed over 5 people for Lyndon Johnson, and that's documented, and got away with it. But his fingerprints are found there in the sniper's nest. We know he didn't shoot Kennedy from there. He couldn't have. The tree would have stopped him, but he was diversionary, I'm sure. Any shots that might have hit Kennedy from the 6th floor window would have been from the West End. That would have been Lee Oswald. This man testifies he was there on the floor with him. This man testifies that he was shooting, but he purposely didn't shoot Kennedy because he was having second thoughts. That may or may not be true. But witnesses on the ground at the same time prior to the shooting, a few minutes before, testified that they had seen a black man in that window, a Negro standing in that window in the 6th floor. Well, as you see from the picture, this Indian man, as dark-skinned as he was, very well could have been mistaken for that.
Right. Wow. Well, see, it seems like there's so many different types of potentials. Is there any movie at all made since then? Because you go on around and around and around. Any that you think comes closest to being the most accurate?
JFK, in 1991. But
and that's what's his name? Did directed that?
Roger.
Yeah, I know you're talking about. Yeah, so JFK.
Yeah,
that one.
That was the most, because they finally implicated the CIA, and they implicated all the behind-the-scenes stuff.
Right.
And
didn't they just release certain information from the Freedom of Information Act on the Kennedy assassination not too long ago?
Well, yeah, but then they grabbed it again,
Come
they're
on.
busy redacting, and I think they said it would come out in May, and this was in like November when they got
Okay,
it.
why are they so? I mean, everybody kind of knows what's going on with the Bushes and the CIA and the.
No, everybody doesn't.
No, you don't think so?
No, but go ahead.
All right. Well, I mean, at least the people that know what's going on, but I guess they don't want to officially allow that to come out because it would. I mean, but back in the '60s, I mean, was Bush even? I guess Bush was around, wasn't he? But back
Bush
then,
was on the street in '63 in Dealey Plaza.
oh, really? He was there at the assassination?
Got his picture in here too. Yeah, he was. Oh yeah, and there's correspondence between him, George Bush, and J. Edgar Hoover at the time.
Wow.
Now, I met Madeline Duncan Brown in '98 at one of the expos in Dallas, a book selling expo.
Yeah.
And now, I knew her by name. Do you recognize the name?
No.
Madeline Duncan Bryan. Well, on Sunday afternoon from those book expos, we all go around and we trade books with one another, and here's one I'd like to read. I went by her big display there, and she was just manning it for somebody else, and big book display. And I said, "Hi, I'm Pat Shannon. I'm just, wanted to see if we could trade some books." She says, "Well, these are not my books. I'm just sitting in for the lady, but the only one I have is this one I wrote." She said, "I'm Madeline Duncan Brown," and I said, "Lyndon Johnson's girlfriend."
Oh, wow.
I fired back, and she met Johnson in '48, and shortly after, I think she was divorced, and she gave birth in 1950 to his illegitimate son, and the pictures are in here, and. But Madeline and I became friends, and I had heard, I met a retired CIA colonel who became promoted to general at the end of his term. He had been in since CIA was formed in '47. He was a pilot. He even flew the CIA murder squad in '53 that went into Iran and killed the Shah.
Oh, wow.
And replaced the Shah with the one that the CIA wanted, our boy,
Yeah.
But Russ really knew some stuff, and it's too long a story to tell in this sitting. But I met him in '94, and we had several breakfasts and lunches together down near Lakeland, Florida, where he lived. And we sat around his pool talking about this, that, and the other. And that was the one subject I could not get Russ to talk about very much, was the Kennedy assassination. And I said, "Well, Russ, why don't we just, we don't even have to put it on tape. Just give me some notes, and I won't even publish it till after you're gone."
Yeah.
Because he was born in '24.
Okay, so he's
See, and I'm sure he's dead by now. He went to South America, where his family was from, in '96. But
did he go for it?
no, he said they'd find out. He said they'll find me. I mean, he knew how. I could not get that. But what I did get was him talking to me about the fact that he did fly what he called the triangular assassination team into Dallas, and he was there at the now famous or infamous meeting at Clint Murchison's house. Do you remember? Do you know that story?
Yeah, no, yeah. Tell us a quick version of that.
Well, I had heard of it, but I had no proof, and out of the mouths of two or more witnesses is what it takes for me.
Yeah.
And he began to talk about that he was there. Oh, I know how it came up.
Yeah.
And don't take this as a curse word, because this is biblical.
Yeah.
But we got to talking about George Bush and Richard Nixon. And he said, those only two guys in the world who can't remember where they were the day Kennedy was killed. Now, I told you about the trauma that goes on.
Yeah.
Well, and he says, "I know where both the lying bastards were." And he said, "They were with me at Clint Murchison's house the night before, Thursday night."
Wow.
And he went on to tell me a few other important people were there.
Sure.
And there was a big powwow in the closed room. He said I wasn't invited in there, but they all went in. Well, that was in '94. He's telling me this. And I had read a little bit about this possible meeting going on Thursday night, the 21st. Well, come '98, and I get to meet Madeline Duncan Brown, and we trade books. And I'm back in Jackson, Mississippi, reading her book a day or two later.
LBJ's girlfriend.
Yeah. And I'm only a few pages in, and she starts to talk about the meeting at Clint Murchison's house, and how Lyndon came in at 10 o'clock, and he was angry, and they all went into the smoke-filled room and had their meeting there in the conference room. And Lyndon came out, and he was angry, and she said while they were in there, Jack Ruby walks in. And
the whole gang.
Yeah, and she said, I knew Jack because I used to hang out down at the Carousel Club. I knew some of the dancers. And now she's 75 years old when she tell me that.
Yeah, sure.
And I said, "Well, did you ever dance there?" She said, "No, but I always wanted to." Well, Madeline goes on to say that when Lyndon comes out of the meeting of the powwow was J. Edgar Hoover and Richard Nixon and George Bush and Murchison and a few others from Washington. Oh, even the banker who ended up on the Warren Commission. Can't call his name on the spur of the moment. But he comes out and he said, "I'll tell you one thing, after tomorrow, those G.D. Kennedys will never embarrass me again."
Wow. So how they embarrassed him? So what was if LBJ was pulling his favors with the Bushes and the CIA and making his moves, What was there? Because my understanding is Kennedy was talking about the silver certificate, bringing it back, getting going up against the Federal Reserve. I mean, he was talking about getting rid of the the covert operation, the CIA itself, and making it more overt through the army. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but what you're saying is more personal, that LBJ felt embarrassed by him, or what's your take?
Well, not only that, but LBJ was about to get booted off the ticket. He was not going to be vice president in '64. So if he's going to become president, they got to do something quick.
I see.
Now, I don't say he planned it. I don't think he was smart enough to plan it, but he was mean enough.
Right.
He was ornery enough to be involved, and especially in the cover-up. They needed him along with Hoover in the cover-up.
Well, when we get back from our first break here, let's talk about a little bit advancing it towards in the 60s, and because we have an idea what happened with JFK to a certain degree, and we know who was involved. But let's talk about the connection between Bobby and Martin Luther King and perhaps Malcolm X on this continuing arm of suppression and repression of the truth from our government agencies back then and today. We'll be right back with Pat Shannon. He's an investigative journalist, author of multiple books. A couple of books right here. You want to check it out. The JFK assassination, uncensored story of the two Oswalds, Lee and Harvey. But you didn't know about that, right? Lee and Harvey. You can reach him at iniworldreport.com, iniworldreport.com. Pat Shannon's in the house. We'll be right back. All right, we are back with Pat Shannon as we thumble through the book here, looking for some keywords of other assassinations going on here. So, I mean, it was just a 60s. Was a really, unbelievable, unprecedented decade. You're talking about key assassinations. They weren't like taking out a couple of drugstore owners or maybe a president from another country. I mean, they were taking out key leaders in American society, and it seemed to start with John F. Kennedy. And I guess because there's not a, what are they called? They got away with it, let's say, and there's not a people in the streets rioting over when the government did this and they felt like they got their secret out. Why wouldn't they try it again? Why wouldn't they keep doing it? I mean, why not? If they could get away with murdering a president in cold blood, blowing his head off in front of everyone, which was a sign in itself, right? Well, why wouldn't they continue with Bobby? Why wouldn't they continue with anybody else they felt a threat, Martin Luther King and so on? And apparently they did, huh?
Absolutely. You see, King was killed April the 4th of '68, and Bobby Kennedy 2 months later, exactly the night of June the 4th, even though he didn't die until after midnight, but exactly 2 months later they hit him. And both were coup d'etat. Both were government inside operations. And this is the 50th anniversary, and I would show this cover. This just the title of the name of the magazine, the Barnes Review, because the next issue, it's not out yet, but the next issue of the Barnes Review will have in it my synopsis of both those murders.
Oh wow!
Both separate cases. And
well, give us the peek view without telling the whole story.
All right, the Martin Luther King situation was far too detailed to go into much detail now. The government story was that James Earl Ray, who had never harmed anybody in his life, he'd been a petty criminal, but he got out of prison. He escaped prison in Missouri State Prison in April of '67. Well, we found out later from his brother that he was let out because his brother picked him up. He got out in a bread truck, but he was allowed to get out. And the FBI was tracking him in Chicago. He went up to, and this is from FBI reports we got later, where the FBI agents are talking about Ray being in Chicago buying a car in June of '67, and the murder doesn't take place for 10 months later. And they tracked him to Canada, and they had him hook up with a guy that he called Raul, and that's all he ever knew him by. But Raul bought him a car, and he sent him to Mexico, to Acapulco, to hide out. He sent him to Los Angeles to a plastic surgeon to get his face changed. His nose was too pointed. They had to round his nose a little bit more to make him look like the guy they were going to have him look like.
Right.
And then, as the story goes, they went to Birmingham, and they bought a rifle, and it was a 270 Winchester, and he takes it back to the motel room, and Raul says that's not big enough caliber. Oh, and he told him he was buying it for his brother-in-law to go hunting, and told the gun owner that, and Anyway. Raul sends him back to get a bigger bore. You need a higher caliber.
Yeah.
So he gets a 30-06, and the dealer says, "And you tell your brother-in-law that 270 will bring down any deer in Alabama."
Yeah.
But what was the situation? They were making doggone sure that they remembered one James Earl Ray buying the gun.
Yeah.
They went to Atlanta, and then
That seems to be a common operation to do. Operative to make it very known you're doing something. So there'd be that sense of, hey, I remember this crazy guy came in here and asked for this.
Exchange guns. Yeah.
Yeah.
So come D-Day on April the 4th, the allegedly Ray, the government story is Ray's in the bathroom of the flop house. It backs up to the Lorraine Motel when King comes out at 6:03 and gets shot in the throat. Well, it was actually Raul. But here's the government story. He then runs out of the bathroom. 2 witnesses said it wasn't Ray. He stuffs the gun in a duffel bag, which also contained a beer can with James Earl Ray's prints. It contained some clothes and.
What a thoughtful assassin,
Yeah, right. That's what I'm getting at. Because it also,
mindful.
and it also contained the thing from the Missouri State Penitentiary radio with his prison number engraved in the back of it. They stuff it all in the duffel bag. They run down the stairs, and the cars down. They throw it in the doorway of the Carlisle Entertainment. People, I forget the name. Starts with a C.
Yeah.
The entertainment place next door, and they jump in. He jumps in his Mustang, and he spins the tires, and he takes off down the street.
Well, how many?
Now they'll never find that evidence there, right?
Yeah. I know. Yeah, it's just got it's too obvious, right? You need a little more challenge to that. So how many shots were there? One shot, and that was it.
Yeah, it was done by a guy named Butch Collier. We explained it in this book, and he was a running mate with a guy named Jim Green, whom I met in Dallas in 2000.
Was he already close to him, King? Was he already close to him, the guy? Like physically, he was in his camp or near him. The murder.
I don't understand your question.
The murderer. You said what was his name again?
Butch Collier. He was a deputy sheriff from southeast Missouri.
Okay, so he was there to protect him at that time, right?
No, he was in the bushes on the ground.
Oh, okay.
And the same time that Raul was in the bathroom posing as a killer, Collier was shooting from the bushes downstairs and ran upstairs, and the two of them ran down the building together, because all the witnesses said there was not one man that jumped in a white Mustang and escaped, but there were two.
So the CIA or LBJ wanted him out because there's so much. What was the main reason, or was there other reason?
Hoover was the one that called King the most hated man in America, and the FBI was definitely in on the cover-up of many of these things, most of these things, like Oklahoma City, which maybe we'll get to.
Yeah.
But in this case, FBI was the instigator. Raul was a FBI agent, and Jim Green saw his ID and told me about it.
So Hoover corrupted them too. Then back then started being. I guess the CIA get away with it. I guess we could get away with it too, huh?
I think they'd been in on things like this for a long time. Hoover initiated the idea of keeping dossiers on senators and congressmen, and he was doing that from way back, and that's where they controlled. That's what we see coming to light right now in D.C.
all the blackmail, it's ran by blackmail.
People are retiring right and left.
I know. Yeah. All right. So what about now, Bobby? So Bobby was, so Duran, right? Or not Duran? No, Sirhan, right?
Yeah. He was definitely MK Ultra. Sirhan could not remember for a decade anything about it, and he assumed that he had killed Kennedy because he all told him he had. Well, let me show you here in the proof how he did not and could not. And this also shows the links to which they'll go to set somebody up. And this is what we're seeing in Parkland and High School in Florida right now with this Nicholas Cruz, who was, seen by two witnesses walking out without a mask, without any guns, nothing. He was sent there in that Uber to be set up as a patsy, but that's another different story. But here's how they do it. First of all, they assigned Sirhan, a lawyer that was already corrupted, and I don't know where to. I don't want to read this, but I want to just use it for reference.
Right.
Anyhow, I talked to 4 criminal defense attorneys after learning this 20 years ago, and every one of them said, no, there's no way that could have happened. And what we're talking about is that a investigative reporter by the name of Ted Chirac did And in 1971 or two, he did a video, which I have in my archives. But the Chirac also proves with an interview that the district attorney that a second 22 pistol was fired in the room that night. Well, we knew that because Sirhan was never close enough to Bobby Kennedy, 3 to 4 feet, never close enough to give powder burns, but yet there were 2 shots behind the ear, which Thomas Noguchi, the medical examiner from Los Angeles, said it had to be from 1 to 3 inches away. Well, that meant that the security guard walking next to Kennedy on his right was the one that probably did it. And they mentioned, witnesses said they saw Kennedy reach back and grapple with the man behind him, and he had a snap-on tie. There it is.
Oh, wow. He took the tie right off of him.
Yeah, it plucked right off.
Yeah,
and Bobby had it in his hand.
Yeah. That's pretty wild. That. I mean, so these are all just coming out.
But hang on. I got to get to the punchline here.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is important.
All right.
And did I lose? Oh, the paper fell out.
Okay.
Here's the important part about how they set it up.
All right.
They brought on a criminalist by the name of Dwayne Wolfer, and he testified under oath that he had personally test-fired the weapon, an Ivor Johnson .22 revolver. Well, I knew that weapon very well. I was in Sydney, Australia the night it happened, but I owned an Ivor Johnson 8-shot revolver. It was the same gun that Sirhan carried. And so I knew exactly what we were talking about. It's a .22 revolver. I, as I say, was an entertainer. I kept that in my car just for protection because we get paid off in cash sometimes on Saturday night.
Right.
Well, the .22 revolver, now listen closely, with the serial number H18602, had found to be the weapon that had fired the bullets that had been removed from Kennedy's neck and several other victims. So in other words, that's got to be the gun that he was firing, right? However, the serial number on Sirhan's Ivor Johnson weapon was H53725, not 18602. Here the whole thing is going on right there in the trial, and not one defense attorney catches it. They've got the serial numbers on their desk. The whole thing was a setup. The defense, everybody was setting up Sirhan to get rid of him. He had to be done in.
Well, talk about how deep these conspiracies go, because now you're looking at, you bring the morgue, the people who work in the morgue, the people who work in the, they declare the people dead or not. It seems such a large conspiracy. It almost doesn't even seem believable. And let's advance this conversation, and we'll go back a little. Let's advance to what you just mentioned a minute ago about the shooting in Florida. How do you know that was a setup? What's your take? Because now I bet you're so trained to see what's coming, what's not coming, what to look at, where to go. You probably see every false flag that pops up or potential as a false flag, and you can start finding common denominators. So what was your first response on the Florida shooting here recently that you knew it was a setup?
Okay. Impossible to do this in the last few minutes we have, but if one will go to...
We could hold over just a little bit.
Well, no, I can tell you what you want to know.
Okay.
And I will report. I do a musings column once a month. Okay. And the March musings covers something. It'll take you half a day to read if you look at all the videos and stuff we set up. Right. But here's what I pointed out there in the beginning, that one of the initial things that we used to, like an Oklahoma City bombing, I would point out to people, whenever something big like this happens, look at the early news reports, because the newsmen on the street are telling the truth. They're telling what's happened. And at Oklahoma City, you can still look back and find their archives where they're talking about the bombs inside the building. They're talking about the unexploded bombs that were hauled away by the bomb squad. All this happened in the first couple of hours in Oklahoma City. But suddenly by noontime, it was this guy named Tim McVeigh in a truck with ammonium nitrate fuel oil who hated the government, and bingo. And that was the story. That's the fake news that becomes fake history.
Wow.
Now, in Florida, I discovered, and I've long before, but since Oklahoma City, we have discovered that they have it so controlled now that even the early news reports can't be trusted. But one significant point is, how long do they harp the negative story? We saw it in the Boston Marathon. It comes on the air, and this happened on February the 14th in Florida, and it happened in mid-afternoon, and that's all we heard the rest of the day. Any other news stories were only headlined in a teletype across the bottom. All they were talking about was a Florida school. This wasn't that big a story.
Yeah.
All right, now, then not only Wednesday afternoon, but all day Thursday. It's the same. So I say that is the biggest earmark.
Biggest indicator, because you repeat it enough, you'll believe it to be true.
Right, and so that's what they began selling or continue to sell on Thursday.
So, and what about the eyewitnesses? Even in the Las Vegas shooting, there were so many different eyewitnesses that would say, hey, there was multiple shooters there. There was a whole, this all like officers, I guess, people of authority there.
Well, that was on October the 1st, and by October the 2nd, we knew, it had to be more than one.
Yeah.
But now we've since learned that Paddock committed suicide by shooting himself twice in the head.
Yeah,
He's a strong dude.
How do you do that?
Also, one of the pictures they showed of him dead had no tattoo, but one of the pictures we see with him, his girlfriend, had a tattoo on his neck. And so the body on the motel room floor, may not have been his. He might have lived. I suspected from the beginning that they had murdered him. Dead men tell no tales, but we don't know. We can't know. But back to Florida now. The day of the shooting, and I got videos right there on that March musings at INI. There is a senior in high school who is being interviewed, local news, and she knew Nicholas Cruz well enough that when he passed by her, she said, "Gee, Nick, I thought that might have been you doing this." She knew him by reputation. He had on no mask. He had no guns. He had on no combat regalia. And he's walking out with her. That's witness number one. That's an alibi witness. Then Friday, or it might have been the following week, I just happened to be no, I wasn't happening to. Somebody tipped me off to have a look at Dr. Phil's show, because they're going to be discussing this Florida shooting case. Right. And Dr. Phil has on the parents of the kid who was friends, and they adopted him after his adoptive parents died, and they were taking him in a few months ago. And that was a good interview. And then he brings on a school teacher, a Spanish teacher in that high school, who also brought one of her former students. He was 19 years old. He was out, but he had known Nick Cruz since the 6th grade. And I don't think even Dr. Phil caught this, but Pat Shannon did, because he said that he was walking out of the school, and there was Nick, because he undoubtedly was with the girl and Nick at the same time. And he was not wearing any mask, and he wasn't wearing he wasn't armed.
Wow.
And so there's two witnesses there.
I think Phil got in trouble for doing that too, because my understanding, because
I think it was inadvertent.
Inadvertent, yeah, sure.
Because he's a good investigative reporter.
Yeah.
He doesn't shy away from the truth, but I don't think he knew what he was getting into.
Right.
But now, then there's a school teacher, and once again, and we got the video at INI until they pull it down. But there's a teacher there who's young, less than 30, I'd say. And she's talking about looking out the hallway, and only 20 feet away at the end of the hall she said, "Gosh, I didn't know the police were here already." Here's a guy that, as she said, carrying a gun like I'd never seen before. And he's got full combat regalia with the iron mask and a whole bit, everything's bulletproof in his whole suit. And she described it, and she said, then he begins shooting down the hall. She was even grazed in the arm. And she ducked back in and locked her classroom door. But then, following that, we have a video of some surveillance from the school. Isn't it amazing that nothing else was released from inside the hallways? Yeah. But here's an outside parking lot surveillance tape that they missed. And here's about 5 guys, and all in dark suits, and you can't recognize any of them. And they're carrying duffel bags, which obviously some guns must have been stuffed in there, and as well as their iron suits. We can assume they're throwing it in the back of a pickup truck, and they drive right through they drive out. And of course, they go through the police thing also. Nicholas Cruz walked right by the cops when he went out.
Right.
He went over to McDonald's.
Right.
And it was an hour or so later that they came after him. So obviously, he was being set up as a patsy. These cops out front didn't know what he looked like. And then the word gets out that, oh yeah, he's over at McDonald's. So now how they got him to confess, got to be MK Ultra.
I was gonna say MK Ultra, and it seems so obvious these days. But let me ask you a question: with all these different things, the Oklahoma bombing, the shooting in Las Vegas, just some more of the recent ones, the ones with the schools here, are there always just one major motivation behind it, or are there usually a handful of reasons why they have these false flags? And what's been your take on all these different ones? Is there usually one major reason or motivation behind it, and then multiple ones they kind of like helps with the purpose of it, or what's your take?
Well, on a lighter side, a couple of years after the Oklahoma City bombing, there were a rash of black churches being firebombed around the South.
Yeah. And
the story was that Hillary Clinton had hidden her whitewater papers in one of the black churches, but she couldn't remember which one it was. But back to Oklahoma City. The story was that indeed the whitewater papers were there. We know something of value was there.
Yeah.
That the FBI, here they're in the middle of rescue, and people are still screaming because they're buried under concrete slabs, and they're trying to dig them out. And 2 hours after the bombing, by 11 o'clock, they stop the rescue and chase everybody out, and they go and start to dismantle all the surveillance cameras around the street on 5th Street there in Oklahoma City,
Right.
and to begin to pull them down. Meanwhile, people are dying.
Yeah.
But they went up to the 6th floor. FBI did not have offices at Murrah Building, but ATF did. And they picked up some stuff up there. We got a video on it called Murder in the Heartland. You can still find on the net. It's 20 years old, but it got commandeered some time ago, and people put it on the net, so we aren't able to sell it anymore. They can get it for nothing. But I would urge them looking. If you can't find it under that name, to try a DVD called Oklahoma City Bombing, Forerunner to 911. We changed the name when we made DVD out of it, but that'll give people a lot of information. It's a 2-hour video, and
Well, do you look at the motivations? Let's take another break, and when we get back, do you look at the motivations of these false flags and kind of piece it together? Because most of the time we probably don't know until it unfolds and we see the outcome of whatever the reason is. But do you have like an extra sixth sense that you're picking up on that? Well, I can see why they did this. Let's talk about that. We get back with Pat Shannon, investigative journalist, author of so many books. I mean, these books here are just everything they ever told me was a lie. It was one of the great books here as well. You should check it out. Go check them also out at iniworldreport.com and just start vetting out and find your own truth, because the truth is out there somewhere, mixed in with a bunch of lies. I'll tell you that much. We'll be right back. All right, we are back with Pat Shannon, and we are talking conspiracies today, and in the past and in the present, which I love because it kind of just, it's a common theme. You know, David Icke talks about problem, reaction, solution, you know, false flags, the reason behind it. You create a problem, then you let people react to it, and then you implement this already established solution you wanted in the first place to make the change you want. So do you feel like some of these false flags, like with the Oklahoma, with the Vegas, with this recent shooting, do you feel like that's kind of the protocol they follow? Is first you create the crisis, let people react to it, and then you try to implement what your new solution is. So does that fall in line with your beliefs?
yeah, sure. Fear mongering, of course, they like to keep the people afraid. They like to keep people believing that government is their god. These are some of the basics about it. Then the particulars, like the Oklahoma City bombing, we learned immediately that the same thing had happened. You may remember there was 2 years before, in January of '93, there was an attack at the Trade Center in New York, and it also had been a setup job where they had I like this one. They had set up a Saudi, I believe he was, one of the Arab countries, and but he stung the FBI. He recorded them telling him that they just wanted him to have, they're going to give him some stuff, it'll just be blank powder, won't be anything to it. He taped them.
Yeah.
Said the whole thing was planned by the FBI, and what happened was I don't know if they charged it like they had done in Oklahoma City with the charges around the columns. It would have killed over 50,000 people because the people working there. But maybe another 25 on the street. Who knows? Mm. But they didn't do it correctly, and the bomb went off, and it killed 6 people, and I think 1,000 got smoke inhalation or something. And what they found was people don't give a hoot what happens in New York. They didn't inflame enough Americans, and that's when they went to the Heartland a couple of years later.
Wow!
Now that's something I can't prove, but that's something I believe.
Yeah,
and also, when you murder children, it plucks the heartstrings of Americans.
Yeah, especially schools. You get into the schools.
Well, they got 19 kids in a nursery at
yeah.
Oklahoma.
Right.
Well, we were fortunate enough to run across a man by the name of Ben Parton. He was a retired brigadier general from the Air Force who had taught demolition for 25 of his 30 years in the Air Force, and he was doing no more than looking at magazines the following week in his home in Arlington, Virginia, and he's turning pages in U.S. News and World Report, and he says to his wife, "Baloney, it wasn't ammonium nitrate fuel oil that did this." Yeah. And he could see, his discerning eye could see where the columns were severed, just like you put a ripsaw through them. And he came to Oklahoma. on his own. He got with the fire department and looked at hundreds of other pictures, and he went on to point out how where he saw exactly where the charges were set, and they're set on the third floor, and the nursery was on the second. It was right above there. It was designed to murder children.
Wow.
But he went on to point out to me on our video, and you can see it on the one I mentioned earlier, that if there ANFO had been in drums in the back of a truck, the air pressure PSI would have been 500,000 inside the truck. But it dissipates so quickly that by the time it got to where the columns were brought down, it would have been as low as 27 pounds per square inch. And he said, in other words, Pat, as if a bicycle tire exploded next to the column.
Wow. It almost seems that the details aren't really important because you could go through every false flag. And honestly, it comes down to like 9/11, the Boston Marathon, Oklahoma. There's so many details, especially 9/11, because that's one of the biggest ones we've had in a long time. There's so many details that don't add up. I mean, so obviously, but you know what? The human mind really doesn't care. They'll take whatever the latest narrative is that kind of makes sense, as long as it doesn't make like our government is trying to hurt us, and it's some rogue person or some other country that's trying to harm us. As long as we accept that part of our box reality, it doesn't really matter how off the details are. And that's, to me, is the scariest part. It's like our emotions override our critical thinking, and that's where I think a lot of problem comes. Now with 9/11. The way I look at it is this, like the motivation. Because to me, I'm more concerned. I'm more interested in the motivate. The details are important because the details you have to know to show people this. But it almost like it falls on deaf ears if the whole society doesn't want to accept it as truth, right?
As long as my own ox is not gored.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but when you look at the motivations, you look at kind of the afterfacts. This is what I see from 9/11. I see the Patriot Act, the Un-American Act. You destroy the Constitution. We lost our right. The government come into our home, doesn't have to follow any manner of rights or anything. They take you, just say you're a terrorist, and they can take you away forever, indefinitely. That's a fact. That's on the books. That's there. We gave us an excuse to go into the Middle East and work for the Rothschilds and take over this land grab over there. It gives us all these different motivations. So this almost seems like there's a multiple reasons why one event can do. It's like never let a crisis go to waste, right? But do you see that these false flags that are building up from like linear period of time from whatever period back whenever to now are working in an agenda towards something bigger that we're not aware of?
Well, you touched on it. The Patriot Act was actually written in January and February of '01. 8 months prior. So they got ready to use it, and suddenly, when this happens, bingo, they pass it, jet speed. Another thing is, and we have documented that as late as July of '01, Osama bin Laden was already on the kidney machine. What do you call it? The
Dialysis.
Dialysis. He's on dialysis. Ask your doctor how long somebody can live without it.
Yeah.
And yet they put it off 10 years after Obama to actually, we finally caught Osama bin Laden. We killed him and we buried him without a funeral. We threw him in the ocean with no evidence, of course. So they use these things when it's convenient. And Obama, he needed some popularity at that time, and so
I remember that. Yeah.
And it was when the birth certificate thing was becoming obvious.
Yeah.
So that's Osama bin Laden, and the military officers confirmed this, that he died in a cave in December of '01, 3 months after, or 2 months after the 3 months after the.
Now he was CIA. He was another patsy, right? I assume.
He was what?
Another patsy for the CIA to take the fall for it?
Yes, he and George Bush Sr. were in the oil business together in 1980.
Yeah. I know, right? Yeah. It's amazing to me, really, when you start looking at all those details too. Even back in the Reagan assassination, that was all Bush. That was all George's hands over that too, or the attempt, I should say, of Reagan assassination.
Once again, the details in here. But did you know that John Hinckley Jr.'s the almost assassin of Reagan, his father was Jack Hinckley, and he and George Bush had been friends and dinner and oil together. But Scott Hinckley had a dinner date that night in Denver with Neil Bush. What are the odds?
No, you would have to say Hinckley, the one who was the attempt there, or the patsy. He was MK, huh?
Oh, I think so.
MK Ultra.
Same with the Beatles, December the 8th of 1980. Chapman.
Chapman,
was his name.
yeah.
There's a whole missing day from Chapman's week. He left Honolulu and he flew to Chicago. Undoubtedly met with some of his programmers because, it was on the 5th, and then the 6th he went on to New York, and on the 8th he killed. What's his name? The Beatles.
George, John,
Lennon,
John
Lennon.
Lennon. So here it is. You got what a great little list of different types of weapons they could use. They have the media. They have tortured MK Ultra people, so their brain splits, so they could program them. That's a great tool to use, right? They have the lying media. They got these key people in key positions. They got judgeships. They got blackmailed people from work in the not the morgue, but what do you call the agency in the police department, or in the
medical examiner.
Medical examiner. I mean, how many medical examiners you think are really positioned, and how many really by these people, these elitists who feel like they, as long as you put the right people in the right power position, you can do what you want.
Bill Clinton had the world's best back in the 80s. I mean, he more than 2 or 3, 4 times he diagnosed as suicide somebody that shot himself 5 times. And this sorts of things. The 2 kids on the railroad track. Do you remember that incident when they found the drug running drop?
Oh yeah.
They murdered them and let the train run over them to make it look like. And then they claimed they got juiced up on marijuana.
Yeah, all the Clintons. Yeah, Clintons had probably the biggest head count of murders around presidents. Probably considered most recent, I would have to say.
Well, it's in over 3 figures. There's 100 and some odd, but who knows how many?
Yeah, I know. You hear about that with the kings and queens, but this is the things what goes on today. What's happening, but most people don't want to believe this. Is it frustrating at all for you that here you are trying to get this word out and getting the truth out, and most people just don't care about the details unless they're investigating themselves, where they're like, yeah, so what? What does that do for you? How does that affect you?
Doesn't bother me anymore.
Right.
It's frustrating. It used to be frustrating, but the truth is truth, and that's all I want to know. I can live with my neighbor the other day asked me, we were at lunch, and he said, "How do you sleep at night?" And I said, "Hey, I wouldn't sleep if I couldn't find out. That's the ones that keep me awake are the ones that keep me bumfuzzled." Sure.
A true truth seeker. And I'll tell you what, thank God we have people like you, Pat, who are pushing this and making it happen. So is there any event that you could think, in the last 100 years, major event, that wasn't a pre-planned false flag for whatever purpose event?
Well, not necessarily false flag. Pearl Harbor was planned for a future event, and there wasn't anything really false about it except how Roosevelt drew in the Japanese and forced them to attack by cutting off their oil supply.
Yeah.
But as far as being a false flag, no, it happened. The Japanese bombed us, all right.
Yeah.
But it's of course it's motivation.
Set up, yeah.
The same people said a week or 2 later. The same people are saying, we don't want to go to war. The day after Pearl Harbor, we're walking down to the recruitment station to sign up. I mean, it motivated America.
Yeah. It's amazing to me. It's amazing how people just don't realize how almost everything has been a setup, and it moves us into a direction where we lose our rights and freedoms. That's just the bottom line. So, Pat, what's next for you now? We're going to have to close it up here. So what's next for you?
You mean next project?
Yeah, next project, of course.
Well, I'm semi-retired. As I mentioned in my musings column about the Parkland High School thing, if I can learn this sitting at home, retired, in front of my computer, then what's wrong with Limbaugh and Hannity? These great conservatives, they won't touch it. They all they keep saying is, "Oh yeah, well this kid shot," but there really is no reason for gun control just because he killed 17 people.
I know.
They will not get to the point that the kid is being set up. He's a patsy, and he didn't do it.
Yeah. It seems like everybody's kind of in the know, but nobody ever says anything because they realize who the real power structures are here in the States and in the world. And I think the more people who have the courage to speak up and say, they're getting redemption these days. I mean, a lot of people now are realizing what you've been saying for the last probably 30, 40 years is very valid. Where back then they thought you were crazy, right? Now look at you now. I mean,
listen, I stood and cheered in my living room with my wife only when Trump began to say, "You're fake news." And I said, "I've been screaming that for 40 years."
Well, there you go. There you hear it. There you have it, I should say. Pat Shannon, it's fake news out there. Be careful. Pat, thanks for coming in and spending this time.
I enjoy rapping. I don't have very many friends I can rap with like this.
Well, listen, listen. We'll have you come back since you're right here and we're right near each other. We'll have you back on a more regular basis. Maybe even create a little show, Conspiracy Hour or something. You know, I love it with Pat Shannon. All right, guys, listen. Thanks for listening. We'll see you tonight and also next week. We have a big week coming up, right? Oh yeah, go check out Pat Shannon at iniworldreport.com and check his books out. They're fascinating, full of detail and full information that you won't get anywhere else. We'll see you then. Take care. Bye-bye.